The small human colony of Tau 9 had always lived peacefully, surrounded by vast deserts and quiet nights. The people there were simple, mostly farmers and traders who rarely had any trouble with the galaxy's dangers. They didn't expect to find themselves at the center of a powerful and dangerous conflict that changed when the message came. It wasn't a normal communication. The message was clear, cold, and full of threat. The voice on the other side of the transmission was unlike any human voice, deep, commanding, and unmistakably alien. "You will bring me my daughter, human. If you fail, your entire colony will suffer. Do not test my patience," the alien queen's voice echoed through the speaker. John Avery, a decorated soldier from Earth, was among the first to receive the message. As the colony's defense commander, he had heard many threats before, but this one was different. The tone wasn't just a warning, it was a promise of destruction. "Who is she? Who is this queen?" John muttered to himself, but there was no answer. All the message contained was the queen's demand: find her daughter and bring her back. If John didn't, the consequences would be unimaginable. John paced back and forth in his command room. His mind raced. He had dealt with pirates, smugglers, and rebel groups in the past, but this was something entirely new. A queen? An alien empire? What could this mean for Tau 9? The colony was too small to have any real defenses against a force like that. If the queen's threats were serious, they wouldn't stand a chance. John had been chosen because of his experience in dealing with high-risk situations, but he had never faced anything like this before. "Captain Avery," said Lieutenant Sandra, one of John's most trusted officers, as she entered the room. Her expression was one of concern, but she kept her voice steady. "We've analyzed the message. It's not a joke." The coordinates she gave. "They match an abandoned station on the edge of the galaxy. It's an old outpost from a race we've never encountered." John nodded grimly. He knew the old outposts. They were often places where lost civilizations once thrived, but they were all empty, no-inhabited ruins. But if the queen was there, it could mean she wasn't just a simple ruler of some distant planet. There was more to this story, and John needed to figure it out fast. "Ready the ship," John ordered. "We leave as soon as possible. Prepare for a fight, whatever this queen is after. We're going to find out." The next day, John's team boarded the Red Star, a small but fast ship built for deep space missions. They had little to go on except the queen's command and the sparse data from the abandoned station. The ship's crew was a mix of seasoned soldiers and scientists, each prepared for the unexpected. As they approached the coordinates, the station came into view. It was a massive structure, floating silently in the black void of space. The outpost was older than anything they had seen before, its once grand architecture now decayed and cracked with age. The station looked almost abandoned, but John couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was waiting for them. They docked at the station and moved out in small groups. Cautiously exploring the silent halls, the station's atmosphere was tense. There were no signs of life, but the place felt alive with energy, as though something powerful was lurking just out of sight. "We've got no idea who or what this queen is, but she's clearly someone with immense power," John said, leading the team forward. "Keep your eyes open and stay close. We don't know what we're dealing with here." As they moved deeper into the station, strange things began to happen. The lights flickered on and off, and eerie whispers filled the air, though no one was there to speak them. It was as if the very walls of the station were alive, watching them. "Captain, look at this," Sandra said, kneeling beside a broken console. "This looks like a transmission log from a species that no one has ever recorded before. This is old, centuries old." John looked over her shoulder, scanning the screen. The alien symbols made no sense to him, but Sandra's face was full of surprise. "These symbols, they're from the Queen's race. It seems they've been tracking human activity for a long time." The realization hit John hard. The Queen, whoever she was, had been watching them. She knew more about humans than they had realized. This wasn't just a simple demand. It was part of something bigger. "We need to find out more about this daughter," John said. "She's so important to the Queen. There must be a reason." Hours later, they finally reached a massive chamber at the heart of the station. The walls were covered in strange, intricate markings that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. In the center of the room stood a large pedestal, and on it was a small, glowing artifact. It wasn't just a decoration, it was a key, or perhaps a message. John stepped forward, his boots echoing on the cold metal floor. As his fingers brushed against the artifact, a sharp voice filled the room. "You've found it," the voice said. It wasn't coming from a speaker, it was coming from the walls themselves. "But the journey does not end here. Bring my daughter to me, or I will bring the galaxy to its knees." The voice was unmistakable. It was the Queen. John's heart raced. This was only the beginning. They had a long road ahead of them, and there was no turning back now. As the team gathered around the pedestal, John couldn't help but feel the weight of the task ahead. The Queen's power was vast, but this was a fight he had to win for Town 9. For humanity, and for whatever future the galaxy held. The mission to find the Queen's daughter had begun, and John was determined to see it through. But deep down, he feared what would happen if they failed. The cold void of space surrounded the Red Star as it moved swiftly toward the unknown. The journey to find the alien Queen's daughter was a mystery, one that weighed heavily on Captain John Avery's mind. He stood at the helm, staring out into the endless blackness. His crew was ready, but the question remained. What exactly were they going to find? John knew that the Queen had power beyond anything the human race had ever faced, but the true nature of her intentions was still unclear. Her message had been chilling, and every step they took toward her daughter seemed to lead them deeper into an uncharted and dangerous realm. The ship's crew was a mix of seasoned soldiers and bright-eyed scientists, all of them puzzled by the mission they were on. No one knew what to expect, and the uncertainty made the air aboard the ship thick with tension. "We'll be arriving at the planet in a few hours, Captain," Sandra said, her voice steady despite the pressure. She was John's most trusted officer, and he appreciated her calm demeanor in times like this. "We've studied the data from the outpost. The planet's atmosphere is unstable, but we can land." John nodded. "Good. Keep monitoring the systems. Let's make sure nothing goes wrong when we approach." As the ship descended toward the alien planet, John felt a strange sense of unease. The planet was covered in thick clouds, hiding what lay beneath. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered before. No human colony had ever been here, and yet the Queen's power seemed to stretch even into this desolate place. Whatever had brought them here, it was clear that the fate of not just Town 9, but the entire galaxy hung in the balance. When they finally touched down, the planet's surface greeted them with nothing but barren wasteland. The ground was cracked and lifeless, and the air was thin. It didn't feel like a place that could be home to anyone, let alone an alien royal family. The silence of the planet was unnerving, almost as if the land itself was holding its breath. "We're going to need to move fast," John said as he gathered his team. "Stay alert, everyone. This place is dead quiet, and I don't trust it." Soldiers strapped on their gear, and the scientists checked their instruments. Everyone knew the importance of the mission, but deep down, they all wondered what would happen if they didn't succeed. The Queen's threat was clear. If they didn't bring her daughter to her, they wouldn't just be fighting her anger, they'd be fighting an entire empire. As they set off through the barren landscape, John's thoughts were on Lyratha. Daughter they had to find. Who was she? Why was she so important to the Queen? And why did the Queen feel so desperate to have her back? It didn't make sense. Lyra was a girl, maybe not even an adult yet. But if the Queen was so powerful, why? Did she need her? John's mind raced with questions, but there was no time for answers. They had to keep moving. Hours passed as they made their way across the alien world. The journey was grueling, and the landscape showed no signs of life. It was a place where time seemed to stand still. The only sound was the crunching of their boots against the dry, cracked earth. Then, as they moved through a narrow valley, something unexpected happened. A flash of light appeared on the horizon, cutting through the dark clouds above. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was a ship. An alien ship, different from anything John had seen before. It hovered above the ground, its engines humming softly, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. John signaled for the team to take cover. "That's not good," he whispered. "Everyone, stay down." The alien ship didn't seem to notice them at first. It was hovering, unmoving, as if waiting for something. But as the seconds passed, John could feel the tension building. He knew the Queen's forces weren't far behind. This ship must have been a scout keeping an eye on them. The Queen was making sure they didn't stray too far from her plans. The ship's lights flickered. Suddenly a hatch opened. Out stepped a tall alien woman, garbed in armor that gleamed under the strange light. She didn't look human, but she wasn't monstrous either. Her presence was commanding, and it was clear that she was no ordinary soldier. "Stay quiet," John ordered. "Let's see what she does." The alien woman looked around, her gaze sweeping over the valley. Eyes seemed to pierce through the fog and darkness. She knew they were here, and it was only a matter of time before she would come after them. John's heart raced. They had to find Lyra before this alien found them. The stakes were higher than ever. Back aboard the Red Star, Sandra worked tirelessly at the communications console. The ship's crew had picked up faint signals, earlier cryptic messages that didn't make sense. Now they had decoded more of the transmissions. "Captain, I think I've found something," Sandra called from the back of the ship. "The Queen's daughter, Lyra, is alive. She's been hiding, but there's a chance she's close." "Yes." Signals are her distress calls. John hurried over, his heart pounding. "Are you sure?" "Positive," Sandra replied. "We can track her, but it's going to take all of us. The Queen's forces are already here. We have to move fast." With renewed determination, John turned to his crew. "We don't have much time. We find Lyra now. No more waiting, no more hiding. Bring her to safety." As they prepared to leave the ship and continue their search, John felt a new sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for Townine anymore. He was fighting for Lyra, for her freedom, and for a chance to stop the Queen's reign before it consumed everything. The journey had only just begun. But John Avery knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let the Queen's power tear the galaxy apart, not if he could help it. The search for Lyra was not going as smoothly as John had hoped. They had been tracking the signals for hours, moving through the desolate landscape, but the planet seemed endless. The dark clouds above offered no help. It was as if the entire world was hiding something important, something they needed to find before it was too late. As John and his team made their way across the rough terrain, every shadow seemed to hide a secret. The faint signals that had brought them here were getting stronger, but they were still no closer to finding Lyra. With every step, John felt the weight of the mission heavier on his shoulders. The Queen's threats echoed in his mind. If they failed, it wouldn't just be their lives on the line. The entire colony, maybe even the galaxy, could be destroyed. "We need to pick up the pace," John said, his voice firm. "The longer we wait, the more time the Queen has to catch up to us." Sandra, always calm under pressure, nodded. "We're getting close, Captain." The signal's stronger. Lyra's somewhere ahead. John glanced up at the sky, a dull gray hue swirling above them. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, something powerful and ancient. It wasn't just the Queen's forces he was worried about. There was a sense that the planet itself was alive, almost as if it was trying to keep them from reaching Lyra. "Stay sharp," John warned. "This place feels wrong." After another hour of walking, they arrived at a narrow canyon. The signal was now so strong that it couldn't be ignored. Lyra had to be close. But as they stepped into the canyon, a strange chill filled the air. The ground beneath their feet was cracked and uneven, and the canyon walls towered high on either side, casting long shadows. John's instincts told him to be careful, but they couldn't afford to stop now. As they moved deeper into the canyon, John heard a faint noise ahead, like a whisper carried on the wind. It was a voice, but it wasn't human. The words were unfamiliar, though the tone sounded desperate, like someone calling for help. "Do you hear that?" one of the soldiers asked, his voice tense. John nodded. "That's Lyra. She's in trouble." They moved quickly now, following the sound of the voice. The canyon seemed to close in on them as they approached the source, the air thick with tension. Then, just as they rounded a bend, they saw her. Lyra was standing in the middle of a small clearing, her back to them, She was facing a group of alien figures creatures that were neither fully humanoid nor entirely monstrous. Their forms were tall and thin, their faces obscured by dark helmets. They looked like soldiers, but they weren't the Queen's usual troops. They were something else entirely. "Lyra," John called out, his voice loud and commanding. The young girl turned, her eyes wide with surprise. She didn't look afraid, but there was a sadness in her gaze. She was no longer the frightened child John had imagined. She was someone different, now stronger, more confident, but still burdened by the weight of her past. "Stay back," one of the alien soldiers shouted, raising a weapon. His voice had an edge of authority, but it was clear that he wasn't the one in charge. John didn't hesitate. He signaled his team to take cover, their weapons drawn, ready for whatever came next. But before they could make a move, Lyra stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the alien soldiers. "They're not my enemies," Lyra said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "They came to help me." John's confusion only deepened. "Help you?" he asked. "From what?" The Queen, Lyra replied, her voice full of bitterness. "She's not my mother. She never was. She wants to control me, use me for her empire. Been hiding from her for years, and now she's finally caught up to me." John's heart sank as he listened. This wasn't what he had expected. The alien queen was more dangerous than he had imagined, and Lyra, her daughter, had been running from her for most of her life. The soldiers around Lyra lowered their weapons, though they kept their distance. One of them, a taller figure, stepped forward. He removed his helmet, revealing his face. His features were sharp, almost regal, but his eyes held a deep sorrow. "I am Alaron," the alien said, his voice calm but firm. "We were once part of the Queen's forces, but we grew tired of serving her. We've been looking for Lyra to protect her from the fate she faces." John studied Alaron carefully. "You betrayed your queen?" Alaron's eyes darkened. "Not betrayal. Oh, a choice too. Fight for what's right. We've seen what the Queen is capable of, and we cannot let her use Lyra to strengthen her hold over the galaxy." Lyra stepped forward, her face resolute. "I'm not going back. I refuse to let her use me any longer." John looked at the girl, then at Alaron and the others. He had no reason to trust them, but their words rang true. The Queen was ruthless. She wouldn't stop until she had Lyra back, and no one knew what lengths she would go to for that. But could he really leave Lyra to face this alone? "I'm here to protect you," John said, his voice softening. "You don't have to go back to her. We'll fight this together." For a moment, there was silence. Then Lyra nodded, a small but determined smile crossing her face. "Thank you," she said. John knew this was just the beginning. They had a long road ahead of them, filled with danger, betrayal, and possibly even more secrets about Lyra and her connection to the Queen.
Yes.
But for now, they had a chance to stop the Queen's plans and protect Lyra from a future of control and darkness. "Let's get moving," John said, his voice steady. "We're not done yet." The battle for Lyra's freedom had only just begun. The journey from the canyon was quiet, too quiet. John couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The alien soldiers who had once served the Queen had pledged to protect Lyra, but their motives were still unclear. John couldn't fully trust them yet, not when they had been so close to the Queen's forces. But for now, they were all that stood between Lyra and the Queen's wrath. As they made their way back to the ship, John glanced at the young girl walking alongside him. Lyra was quiet, her face distant, as if she was lost in thoughts of a life she could never have. The weight of her past was clear in her eyes, but so was her strength. She wasn't the frightened child John had imagined. She had lived through more than he could ever understand, and now she was ready to fight for her freedom. "We have to get to the ship," John said, trying to break the silence. "The Queen's forces won't wait long. She'll send everything she has after us." Lyra nodded, but she didn't speak. Instead, her gaze kept drifting back to the direction they had come from, as if she could still feel the Queen's presence calling her back. John could understand that feeling. The Queen, was her mother after all. The pull of family, of blood, was strong even when the bond had been twisted into something dark and dangerous. "I can't go back," Lyra said suddenly, her voice low but firm. "I won't let her use me." John glanced at her, his heart heavy. With sympathy, "You don't have to go back. You're not alone anymore." But Lyra shook her head. "You don't understand. She's everything to my people. She's the queen. And if I don't return, she'll destroy everything." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment John was silent. He didn't know what it felt like to be trapped in a world like that, to be the key to an empire, to hold so much power and yet have none of it for yourself. It was a burden he couldn't imagine. Back at the ship, the crew was waiting. Sandra had been busy analyzing the information they had gathered, but she looked up as they entered the docking bay. "We've got a problem," she said without wasting time. "The Queen's forces are closing in on us. We're going to have company soon." John nodded, his mind already shifting to the next step. "How much time do we have?" "Not much," Sandra replied, her fingers flying over the controls. "We need to leave this planet now. The longer we stay, the more they'll be able to track us." John turned to Lyra, who had just entered the bay. "We're leaving. You're coming with us. No more hiding." Lyra hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She didn't say anything else. Her eyes were fixed on the control panel, and her face was a mask of determination. It was clear that she wasn't just running from the Queen anymore. She was running towards something bigger than herself. The crew quickly prepped the ship for takeoff. But the weight of their situation was never far from John's mind. They were outnumbered and outgunned. If the Queen's forces caught up with them, they wouldn't stand a chance. He could feel the tension in the air as the Red Star powered up, preparing to leave the planet's surface. But as they lifted off, something unexpected happened. A pulse of energy shot through the air, striking the ship's outer hull. The ship rocked violently, throwing everyone off balance. Alarms blared, and John's hand instinctively reached for the controls. "What was that?" Sandra shouted, her voice sharp with panic. "Incoming fire." One of the crew members yelled from the back of the ship. "They're already here." "Don't." John's mind raced as he quickly assessed the situation. The Queen's forces had found them faster than expected. They had to act now, or they would never make it out alive. "We need to break through their blockade," John said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Sandra, can you get us to a jump point?" Sandra worked quickly, her eyes scanning the readouts. "I'm trying, but the damage is too much. We'll need at least 10 minutes to make the jump." "Then we don't have 10 minutes, John said, turning to his team. "We fight." The crew scrambled into position as the Red Star raced toward open space, with alien ships hot on their tail. The ship shook with each blast from the pursuing fleet, and John could feel the pressure building. They were outnumbered, but they had something the Queen's forces didn't: the element of surprise. "Target their engines," John commanded, his voice calm but commanding. "If we can slow them down, we can make the jump." The weapons officer fired the ship's cannons, and the enemy ships began to break apart as they were hit. It was a desperate fight, but it was working. For now, they were holding their own. Lyra was silent as she stood near the controls, her eyes focused on the enemy ships. John could see the tension in her face. She was struggling with the knowledge that her mother's forces were closing in on them. But there was something else there, too. Something stronger than fear. Lyra had made her choice. She wasn't going back. She wasn't going to let the Queen take control of her life any longer, as the battle raged on. The Red Star finally cleared the blockade and jumped into hyperspace, leaving the Queen's forces behind. The ship's systems hummed, and the crew exhaled in relief. For now, they were safe. But John knew that this wasn't over. The Queen would come for them. She would never stop until she had her daughter back. And Lyra would have to face the truth of who she was and what she was capable of. They were going to survive. John turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "You made the right choice. We'll help you, no matter what happens." Lyra nodded slowly, her face calm but determined. "Thank you, Captain. I won't let you down." As the ship sailed through the stars, John knew that the real battle was just beginning. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments or further details. The Red Star was cruising through the darkness of space, but the calm was deceiving. Inside the ship, every crew member knew that the calm before the storm wasn't going to last. They had managed to escape the Queen's forces for now, but it was only a matter of time before the relentless pursuit began again. John Avery stared out the viewport, his thoughts focused on Lyra, the alien girl who had become the key to the galaxy's future. Lyra had spent much of the journey silent, her thoughts far away. She wasn't the frightened girl they had first met. No, she was becoming someone else, someone stronger. But John could tell that the burden of her past, life she had lived in the Queen's shadow, was still weighing heavily on her. "How are you holding up?" John asked as he approached her, trying to break the silence that had filled the ship for the past few hours. Lyra turned to him, her face unreadable. "I don't know anymore," she said softly. "I thought I could run from her. I thought I could hide, but I can feel her, always. She's out there, and she'll never stop." John nodded, understanding more than she realized. He wasn't from this galaxy, but he understood what it was like to feel hunted, to feel trapped by forces beyond your control. It is a terrible feeling, one he wished no one ever had to experience. "We'll figure it out," John said, trying to reassure her. "We're not alone in this." Lyra gave him a small, tired smile. "I don't think I've ever been alone," she replied, her voice soft with something that could almost be called sadness. "But I've never felt free until now." The ship continued its journey into the unknown, but John couldn't ignore the ticking clock. They had only so much time before the Queen's forces would catch up. The longer they stayed in open space, the easier it would be for the Queen to track them. John needed to make a decision soon. Back in the command center, Sandra was working hard to analyze their options. She'd been studying the Queen's forces, looking for any weaknesses they could exploit. After all, John's crew was small, and their ship was no match for the Queen's fleet in a full battle. They needed a plan, one that would give them a chance to strike back. "Captain," Sandra called, pulling John out of his thoughts. "I've got something. There's a nearby nebula, just a few hours away. The energy fields there should make it hard for the Queen's ships to track us. We could hide there for a while." John considered the idea for a moment. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best shot. Hiding in the nebula would give them some time to regroup, to figure out their next move. It was risky, but they had no other choice. "Set a course for the nebula," John said. "We'll go there and wait. But we need to prepare for a fight, just in case." Sandra nodded. "Aye, Captain." The ship altered course, heading toward the nebula. As they got closer, the stars around them seemed to warp and distort, hidden by the thick clouds of gas and dust. The nebula was a dangerous place, but it was also a perfect hiding spot. The Queen's ships would have to rely on their sensors, and in this dense fog of particles, those sensors wouldn't be reliable. It was their best hope of escaping the Queen's relentless pursuit. As the ship entered the nebula, the entire crew went into high alert. The environment was unstable, and the ship's systems had to work harder to stay on course. The swirling clouds of gas made it nearly impossible to see anything outside the ship, and John couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. They were on borrowed time. The Queen would catch up soon, and when she did, they would have no choice but to face her. "How long can we stay here?" John asked, walking up to Sandra as she worked at the control panel. Sandra's fingers moved quickly over the controls, but her face was tense. "Not long. The nebula's energy fields are interfering with the ship's systems. We can only stay here for a few hours before we start losing power." "How much time do we need?" John asked. Sandra paused, then turned to look at him. "A day at most. We need time to think, time to prepare. We can't afford to wait too long before making a move." John nodded. "We'll use this time wisely, Lyra. Are you ready for what comes next?" Lyra, who had been standing quietly nearby, turned to face him. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "But I have to try. For all the people who are counting on me, for everything I've lost." As the ship settled into the quiet of the nebula, John couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility. He had taken on this mission not just to protect Lyra, but to protect the entire galaxy. If the queen succeeded in capturing her, there would be no end to her reign. She would stop at nothing to expand her power, and no one, not even the most powerful empires, would be able to stop her. But John knew one thing for sure: he couldn't let that happen. They would fight until the very end. "Get some rest while you can," John told his crew. "We've got a big fight ahead of us, but we're not backing down." Lyra nodded and walked to her quarters, her expression firm but weary. John watched her go, his mind racing with thoughts of the battle to come. He didn't know how they would defeat the queen, but he knew they had to try. Later that evening, the crew gathered in the mess hall. The atmosphere was quiet, but there was an undeniable sense of unity among them. They were no longer just a crew, they were a team, bound by a common cause. And they weren't going to stop until they had given everything to protect Lyra and stop the queen's plans. John stood up, raising his glass. "To freedom," he said, his voice steady. "To the future." The crew raised their glasses, their faces full of determination. "To freedom," they all echoed. As the cheers filled the room, John felt a spark of hope. They were facing the most dangerous enemy they could imagine, but they were in this together, and together they would fight. The nebula's dense clouds swirled around the red star as it drifted through the darkness of space. The crew had made their decision, and they were ready for the battle that would decide Lyra's fate. John Avery stood by the command console, watching the stars flicker and fade as the ship moved deeper into the nebula. Every second felt like an eternity. Soon, they would have to leave this hiding spot, but for now, they had the advantage of surprise. The Queen's forces would eventually find them, John was sure of that. But for now, they had time. It's time to prepare, time to make sure they were ready for what was coming. The crew was tired but focused. Everyone knew that when the Queen's ships arrived, they would be outnumbered and outgunned. But John wasn't afraid. He had a team of skilled soldiers, and together, they would fight until the very end. Sandra was already working on the ship's systems, running diagnostics and making sure everything was ready for the coming fight. She had been the one to suggest hiding in the nebula, and now she was making sure their ship was in top condition to leave when the time came. "We can't stay here much longer," Sandra said, her voice filled with tension. "The Queen's fleet will be here soon. We need to move." John nodded. "We're ready. As soon as we break out of this nebula, we make a run for it. If we can stay ahead of them long enough, we might just have a chance." Lyra stood near the back of the room, her gaze fixed on the starboard window. She had been quiet since their arrival in the nebula, her thoughts swirling, just like the clouds outside. John could see the struggle in her eyes. She had been running from her mother for so long, and now she was about to face her. The weight of that decision was enormous. "Lyra," John said softly, walking over to her. "You've come a long way. You've made it this far. Now it's time to fight for your freedom. We're all here for you." Lyra turned to him, her expression calm but her eyes betraying the fear she was trying to hide. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said quietly. "I've been hiding for so long, I've never really had to fight before, and now I'm supposed to face her." John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you think. You've already fought for your freedom just by getting this far. Now it's time to finish it." Lyra looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right. I can't run anymore. I have to face her." The red star broke through the dense clouds of the nebula, and the stars once again filled the viewport. They were no longer hiding, were moving forward toward the Queen's fleet. The ship's engines hummed as they increased speed, and the crew moved into position. John stood at the helm, his hands steady as he guided the ship through space. The sensors were already picking up the Queen's ships. They were close. Too close. "Prepare for battle," John ordered. "All hands to their stations." The crew quickly responded, the calm professionalism of the soldiers evident as they took their positions. Lyra, now standing beside John, glanced at him, her expression determined. She was ready. "Need to find a way to break through there." "Lines," Sandra said, her voice tense. "We can't fight them all head-on. We need to make it to a nearby asteroid field. It'll give us cover, but it's risky. We don't have a choice," John said. Set course for the asteroid field. We'll use it to our advantage. As the Red Star sped toward the asteroid field, the first shots from the Queen's fleet rang out. The ship rocked as the blasts hit their shields, but the Red Star held strong. The Queen's ships were closing in fast, their weapons firing relentlessly. Shields holding at 70%, Sandra called out, her voice filled with urgency. But they won't last long if we keep taking hits like this. Keep them on our tail, John commanded. We're almost to the field. The Red Star entered the asteroid field, the massive rocks flying past them at high speed. The crew worked quickly, dodging incoming fire and using the asteroids for cover. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to slow the Queen's forces down. Captain, we've got incoming fighters, Sandra said. They're breaking off from the main fleet. Take them down, John ordered. We can't let them get through. The ship's weapons fired, sending blasts of energy toward the enemy fighters. Explosions lit up the dark void of space as the enemy ships were destroyed one by one. John could feel the pressure building with every shot. They couldn't keep this up forever. Lyra stood at the back of the ship, watching the battle unfold. Before her, she felt the weight of the Queen's forces closing in, but she also felt something else's strength she hadn't known she had. Her mother had made her feel small, insignificant, as if she were nothing more than a tool to be used. But here, surrounded by people who believed in her, she felt something different. She was more than just a daughter. She was a fighter. I have to do something, Lyra said, her voice strong. John looked at her, surprised. What do you mean? Lyra stepped forward, her eyes focused on the controls. I have powers I haven't fully understood, but I think I can help. John stared at her for a moment, unsure of what she meant. But there was a determination in her face that he couldn't ignore. You're sure? I have to try? She said. Her voice unwavering. Lyra moved to the center of the room, her hands outstretched. The air around her seemed to shift, the energy in the room vibrating. John watched as the ship's systems began to respond to her presence. The shields grew stronger. The weapons fired more accurately. It was as if Lyra had tapped into something beyond her own understanding, a power she had always had, but never fully used. I can help, Lyra said, her eyes glowing with determination. Let's end this. As Lyra's power surged, the crew felt the change. The Red Star became more agile, more powerful. The enemy fleet, though still vast, began to falter. One by one, the Queen's ships were taken down, their forces weakening under the combined might of the crew and Lyra's newfound strength. John could feel the tide of battle shifting. The Queen's fleet was not invincible, with Lyra by their side. They had a chance, a real chance to stop her. We're not done yet, John said, his voice filled with determination. But we're winning. The fight wasn't over, but the Queen's forces were on the back foot. And for the first time in a long while, John Avery allowed himself to hope.